everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of BCG's Health Tech Videos. Today's panel will focus on virtual care, specifically comparing purely virtual to virtual plus brick and mortar care. I am Ariel Rothman, and I'm excited to introduce our moderator, Steve Filler, who is Managing Director and Partner at BCG and Director of Digital Health. Our panelists today are Adam Travis and Tara Raffi. Adam is VP of Corporate Strategy at Teladoc Health, and Tara is co-founder and CEO of Almond, a startup reimagining OBGYN care. Thank you both so much for joining. I'll pass it off to Steve now to begin the discussion.
Excellent, thank you. Just an open question. Now that the COVID pandemic is clinically over, what are your projections for the impact on telehealth visits over the next 5 years? Adam, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks for having me. So, it was a very interesting 2 years, I would say 2020 and 2021 for Teladoc. Our visit volume understandably surged, I think, in line with, market volume in that time period. I think we basically had an overnight near doubling of our visit volume. Obviously, as things started to reopen in 2022, we did see an initial dip, and certainly our growth more or less plateaued. I would say moving forward, we're certainly seeing growth, obviously not the kind of explosive growth in the market that we saw going into quarantine. But I think what we're seeing in some of the research we've done, not just on our own volume, but just looking at trends in the market and competitors, is that we expect somewhere in the order of 10 to 15% year-over-year annual growth for the next 5 years in telehealth visit volume. I think what's different about that, what's driving the growth now before going into COVID, is that one of the more notable things that happened in COVID with telehealth visits is that health systems have now really much more heavily adopted virtual visits as a front door. And so I would say, whereas before quarantine, it was, competitors like Teladoc, other virtual-oriented clinics really driving that growth. Now you're seeing health systems drive a significantly higher share of that visit volume than before COVID, given now the recognition that it can be a really valuable way to drive patient engagement, to get people in. And I don't think there's any going back to how it was before.
From our perspective at Almond OBGYN, we're an early stage company, and we're just getting started. What I can speak to this from a specialty perspective. OBGYN was one of the slowest adopters of telehealth, even post-pandemic. So OBGYN was the second slowest non-surgical specialty to adopt telehealth. As of 2021, it was like 7% of visits in OBGYN were done over telehealth. We believe over the next 5 years, at least in our practice, which is pushing more creative ways of engaging patients in particular over telehealth, we believe we can get to 50%, and that's the sweet spot for OBGYN. That being said, that's before large language models, and I believe the pace of innovation in bringing large language models to healthcare is going to change the rate of telehealth adoption, and we're going to see actually a significant portion of telehealth or chat-based models be replaced by large language model type tools. So that throws a wrench in our predictions, and we'll have to see how that evolves.
Tara, at Almond, you have very unique perspective and workflows that are really transcending the way care is being delivered. Can tech-enabled care survive without a fundamental redesign of the clinical workflows and payment structures? How are you seeing this specific to OB care in general?
So our perspective is that tech-enabled care allows a fundamental redesign of clinical workflows and payment structures. So we think about that question just fundamentally differently. We think that, and I'll give you an example in OBGYN. Today, when somebody goes through pregnancy, a typical patient journey is that you have 15 visits in person, typically within OBGYN. About only half of those visits really need to be happening in person with an OBGYN. The other half of those could be handled remotely. You actually don't even necessarily need to talk to a care provider. What you really need is to have your weight taken. You need to hear fetal heart rate. You need to do a blood pressure. And talking to a care provider of some sort could also be helpful, and that could certainly happen over telehealth. So that's what we're excited about, is how do we use tech-enabled, either telehealth or devices or other types of tools to allow us to create financial leverage in these models to allow us to cover other value-add services for patients. So we're not depending on a system level payment structure change. We found ways to exist within this current one.
Adam, what are you saying?
I really think it depends on the type of care. I would say, I think for some things, if I look at where Teladoc has historically been focused, which is urgent care, mental health care, and now primary care consultations, I don't really think what we're asking our providers to do is that much different than what providers in practice are doing. The difference being we're not in a room, we're using, a teleconferencing platform like this. So, and that, for any specialty, therefore, that is dependent on in-person care, I think you're going to have much more reimagining, so to speak, of the clinical model required to make tech-enabled care work, right? And what you're choosing to do virtually or using tech may differ very much from what you would do in a brick and mortar setting, right? But it really, I think, depends on the specialty and the specific kinds of activities you're looking to replace through virtual or through tech.
I think that's fair. I mean, we're seeing with a lot of our clients that are looking to change their business models and business practices that they're going to have to continuously look at how care is being delivered, because margins are depressed, health systems are candidly struggling, and as they are looking to expand and basically sustain themselves, the model has to be reevaluated. And fortunately, I'm one to always say, and I built my career on it, is based on the technology will enable us to hopefully provide care to those who need it most, at the right time, right location, right for the right cost. So hopefully we're getting there. Tara, I think your model is one that people should aspire to not replicate, but aspire to follow, because it is truly getting care to those who need it most and have been underpenetrated, underutilized to date. So significant kudos. Pivoting a little bit, are the economics of virtual only care truly scalable? And I'm going to look to you first. Tara, I definitely want to hear your take on this as well. But how sustainable, how scalable is, in your mind, virtual only care?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So I would say for a provider, why not? They should at least be as good as brick and mortar, which granted aren't very good, usually low single digit, right? But obviously with significant opportunity to improve on those economics because of, what Tara touched on, which I don't necessarily see large language models outright replacing providers in a tech delivered care model, but it will present an opportunity to take a lot of work off the plate of a provider, right? And so that's, I think, to me, the biggest promise of a tech-enabled or virtual care model is that it's easier through use of conferencing, non-visit-based interfaces, chat, asynchronous communication, what have you, to actually ultimately seamlessly weave in AI, large language models, or whatever future AI technology has yet to be conceived to actually, almost sort of mirror the physician or the clinician and do a lot of their work for them. So absolutely, the economics for providers should be scalable. I think if you combine that with the fact that, value-based care models that don't just reward visits completed, provide even more flexibility to make sure you're using a clinician's time in the most value-added possible way. There's, I think, no limit to how good the economics can get. I think for the payer, I'm also optimistic that the economics for a payer are favorable, but I think it could take more time for that to play out. If you're a payer, obviously you're looking at, okay, if I'm having virtual disintermediate my brick and mortar network, will that ultimately result? The main questions we get all the time is like, what are you, especially now that we're in primary care, is what are you doing to make sure you're not disintegrating care? What are you like? We don't want you to do a visit, and because you don't own the facility, like ultimately if someone needs a test, a procedure, something that requires them to be in a facility, it raises a bar for us to be able to effectively coordinate with external facilities. And I think we're frankly at the early stages of having the right kind of health data ecosystem and right kind of interoperability standards where we can truly seamlessly coordinate with an external brick and mortar physician. I think until that happens, like the economics and the returns on a fully virtual approach for a payer will, not be, it'll take time, I think, for it to reach its, sort of optimum state, so to speak.
Tara, how have you seen, a similar question, but how have you seen payers adapt and be willing to reimburse for OB virtual care?
For us at this stage, we haven't had an issue with reimbursing telehealth visits.
Where do you see the market moving as you look to the future?
This is the big question. Where are telehealth reimbursements going to go? From what we can tell, telehealth reimbursements are going to continue to be a significant part of our revenue. And I think payers are realize that they need to have a financially viable approach to reimbursing telehealth for providers. Where what we're trying to do with Almond is really unique in that we are trying to do both significant telehealth and significant brick and mortar. And so to kind of bridge this coordination gap that Adam, you're also talking about. And we know that in our model, in OBGYN specifically, 1 in 6 UTIs goes to urgent care, 50% of OBGYN visits really should be on telehealth. And so at a system level, the savings of a hybrid model should be really, really significant. So we believe in it.
As a former med group administrator, I'm jealous and would have loved this to have been there about 10 years ago. So to both of you, Tara, Adam, thank you both very much for the time. We really appreciate your insights, your guidance, and your thoughts.